I'd like to start out talking about what this will do to the state. This is being pushed as a job creator for the state of Indiana. The Economic Policy Institute, a bipartisan organization, studied how many jobs were created in Indiana, and Indiana in the last 5 years has created more jobs than all of the Midwest right-to-work states put together. The governor and the Republican leadership downstate believe that we have to be competitive, but it seems like we already are competitive. The governor has claimed that he's brought a lot of jobs to the state of Indiana. The record shows we're out competing the right-to-work states, so why do this? Right-to-work will do one thing. Both the proponents and the opponents of it agree. It will drive down wages for citizens in the state of Indiana. I don't know why people think that's a good thing, but in fact, driving down wages for people in the state of Indiana has a direct effect on the state of Indiana. If you bring in 3 $10 an hour jobs and get rid of 2 $30 an hour jobs, the state's in the hole by 50%. Because those people that make $30 an hour, they pay as much taxes as 3 people making $10 an hour. The fact of the matter is, if right-to-work passes, it will hurt small business in Indiana. It will hurt small business because they rely primarily on folks that work for a living to support their businesses. If they have less money will be spent in the community. Tony?
Well, that Mike has set the stage. We're here in LaPorte, and in Indianapolis, Mitch Daniel is going to be standing up to give the State of the State address. And I think we're here in LaPorte, in this hall, speaking out because he doesn't want us to speak in Indianapolis. This morning, the House Republicans put the right-to-work bill before the committee, and in 6 minutes, it was approved by the committee. No debate allowed, no amendments allowed. Now, we're all grown-ups in here. I think almost all of us are union people. I bet a big chunk of you are. And I think you're also kind of people who pay attention to politics. And you know that there are times when politicians want discussion and they want the public involved in things, and there's definitely times when they don't. And we're watching one right now. Because as Mike was laying out, we could go all into all those economic arguments about does it create jobs and this and that and this and that. That's why we brought tonight a report. It's written by an economist, by Professor Martin Wolfson at Notre Dame. He's at the Higgins Research Center. He also wrote a much longer report about the impact of right to work. And Professor Wolfson had to go back and look at the economic data because, the other side is out there, claiming, well, wages go up and this and that and all that stuff about right-to-work states versus non-right-to-work states. Let's get to the heart of the matter, what this is really about. It's about democracy. It's about stifling democracy. And it's about stifling this democracy right here that we're sitting in. It's about turning out the lights in this building so that working people can't get together and speak up on their behalf. It's about how working people get together in workplaces and deal with employers to improve their lot, to democratically and fairly work out a way in which whatever is produced by that firm or that enterprise, that we get a fair share of it, and that we get a fair share of it in a democratic way. That's what this is really about. One thing that has really motivated me lately about this issue is when I look at what are the right-to-work states and how they came about. Now, Mike said I'm a letter carrier, and I've been a letter carrier for 30 years, and I'm down to my last days as an active employee in the U.S. Postal Service. I retire at the end of this month. Had a wonderful career, wonderful job, paid me good wages, supported my family real well. My sons are in college. We lived the middle class life that I think should be available to as many people as we can get into it in America. But in that time, I was able to do that. I was able to do that because my union had an ability to bring that standard of living up. But in the post office, you're kind of a right-to-work situation. Because in the post office,
Isn't this really about making more money for the upper class?
right,
For
right,
1%.
right, for the 1%ers.
That's
It's
what
a-
they're looking for.
Right, it's a boom for the 1%ers. And how do they get there? The only way they're going to get there, and they've been doing it for the past 30 years, is keeping down popular interest, the popular voice, and right to work. You know, this is the thing that astounds us. This thing has been around for 60 years. Indiana, as most of us in here know, once had a right to work law. In 1957 they put it in. And then a few years later, the only state in the country to take it back out. But what states are right to work? All the old Confederate states. They were the first ones to sign up in 1947. Anybody, you don't have to do big economic studies and all of that. Everybody in this room knows. In 1947, 1948, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, they all went right to work. Big tremendous economic boom then? 1950s, 1960s? Anybody remember that? Remember how wonderful the standard of living was in those states? Why didn't it produce high wages then? Why didn't it produce lots of jobs then? It's the same exact piece of legislation that we want to pass supposedly in Indiana. If it didn't work 50 years ago, why is it going to work today? Well, what does it do? Well, what it does is weaken the labor movement. And that brother is right. The purpose is to weaken the labor movement so it cannot achieve a fair distribution, so that the middle class gets smaller, not larger, that it gets smaller. And what we should be really motivated about is that our governor is going to stand up there and make a speech saying his vision for Indiana is one in which the middle class is smaller and has a lower standard of living. Now, you stand up there and say that and put that to a vote, Mitch Daniels. How many votes are you going to
How can
get?
you say that when you gave away the toll road?
That was one way. That was one way to make our state
Well-
poorer.
Well, if in fact somebody ran on the platform that what I'm going to do is try and reduce wages in the state of Indiana, nobody in this room would vote for him. Nobody would vote for him. Why would you vote against your own economic interest? The only thing Right to Work does is reduce wages by reducing the effectiveness of labor unions. Right to Work is the biggest misnomer, and the best quote I've ever heard was by one of my personal heroes, Martin Luther King, and he said, right to work is a lie. It provides no rights, and it provides no work. Its sole purpose is to reduce wages by making ineffective collective bargaining. That's what this is about. Make no bones about it. The people pushing this do not view you as constituents. They view their constituents to be people like Alec and the Koch brothers. And those people that fund their campaign. The fact of the matter is, we are non-existent to them. Now, I will say this. We have a Republican representative here, Tom Dermody. And he has said he will vote against Right to Work. I certainly hope. Some of these guys stood up and did the right thing for their constituents and not the wrong thing. I too, I worked for NIPSCO for 33 years. I educated and raised 9 kids on a working man's wage. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of it because my union fought for and got a living wage, and I was able to raise those 9 kids. I want my children to have the same opportunities. And with right to work, if right to work passes, the only way they'll have those opportunities is by moving out of the state of Indiana, and I won't get to see my grandkids as much as I'd like. This will have a direct effect on all of us.
Mike is right in talking about Tom Dermody, and that's what this town hall is really about. Because, as Mike said, who would really vote for a piece of legislation if the politician or the legislator stood up and said, the purpose of this law is to lower your wages? That's our long-term effect. That's what we want to do. Right now, we do not need to pass a piece of legislation like this with a 6-minute hearing in a committee. Now, you may argue, well, there was a study committee in the summer, and this bill has come up before. The reality is, and there's been an impartial poll done by Ball State University, that more than half the people in Indiana do not understand what this law is or what this term means. Most people do not pay attention to political issues until it's like basketball, pretty much. You don't watch the whole season or anything. You watch that last 2 minutes. You want to see what happens in the last 2 minutes. Then you're going to watch the game. And I think a lot of American people do the same thing. A lot of people in Indiana will do that. They're not really going to pay attention to this or understand what it's about until it's really getting exciting and they get to hear what's happening. That's why we're saying there is no justification for calling this an emergency, which is the other malarkey Mitch Daniels is going to talk about tonight. He's going to say he needs to have this legislation passed because it's an emergency. Like I said, Indiana could have had this law any time in the past 60 years. Doesn't quite seem like an emergency to me. Right?
Unemployment in Indiana is actually slowly dropping. Unemployment is.
Right, in the whole country.
And if it was an emergency, why wasn't it an emergency 2 years ago when the unemployment was the highest in the records of the state since the Great Depression? If it was going to be an emergency, that's the time it would have been an emergency, not now. This is a direct attack on the citizens of the state of Indiana and their wages. That's all it is. Now, there are some folks out there that say, well, this is just about union wages. It's not. Everybody that runs a business knows that if they're going to be competing for employees with the guy down the street, and that's a union shop, that they're going to have to come close to those wages, or they're going to lose their best employees to the union shop. I've experienced this personally in Warsaw. They have 5 different orthopedic implant companies that make implants. One of them, is a union shop. It's a steelworker shop. Whenever we negotiated a raise, all 5 of them got not quite as much, but all 5 of them got a raise. Why did they get a raise? Because they didn't want those guys quitting the non-union companies and going to the union company.